okay, all right. Sister Gemma, good morning from the
Assalamualaikum.
UK. Hi, Assalamualaikum. So today we are having Sister Nadia and Sister Gemma in our day 2 of of this International Halal Conference, um, 6th edition, Alhamdulillah, and that we started this Halal Conference, International Halal Conference during the COVID actually, and I'm glad that Alhamdulillah we have successfully continue this conference online, giving avenues for people to attend international conference online without having to spend money for traveling expenses. And for people like me who's a bit restricted in traveling, it's also a blessing because now I am able to still participate in international events and contribute towards this noble cause and also continue my contribution in the halal journey. Okay, without much ado, before we start today's session, I just have to clarify a bit for those who have the agenda. It's supposed to start with our Dr. Awal Fuseini, but as of now, I believe he's still in the plane from traveling from Wellington to Brisbane. So he's really hoping that once he hop off the plane and clear the custom and immigration, he'll find some place to then join us from the airport, or if the hotel is nearby, from the hotel. He really looked forward to it. He, like some of you, had confusion in terms of the timing. So he thought that he'll be already in the hotel when this started, but it turns out that he's not. He's still in the plane. So what we're doing now is that we'll start first with Sister Nadia, followed by Sister Gemma. If Dr. Awal has arrived, he will make his presentation. Otherwise, we'll continue with the panel session and see whether he can join in between. And we'll see how the timing goes. If all goes well, he may present if everybody is agreeable. Okay? All right. So thank you very much for your attention. And let's start first, Sister Nadia. Oh yeah, before that, let's pray, recite the dua, and recite the Surah Al-Fatihah first and recite the dua, yeah? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Arrahmanirrahim. Maliki yaumiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdinas siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladzina an'amta 'alaihim ghairil maghdubi 'alaihim waladdallin. Amin. Rabbi zidni ilma, Rabbi yassir wa la tu'assir, Rabbi tamim bil khair. Okay, Sister Nadia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here today. Should I just share my presentation?
Yes, please go ahead. Can you share?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
Oh, don't tell me this is going to do this. Okay. Is everyone can see it?
You need to do on the screenshot, screenshot. All right, good.
Yeah.
Yes,
All's good?
All full.
Okay, can you still see it clearly?
Oh no, now you're on speaker note.
Oh, okay. Well, this is going to be one of those. Sorry. I was working perfectly at work. Oh, sorry, hang on a sec.
No problem.
Oh, no, it's not doing it at all. I'm so sorry. Sorry, I've just got to close my I'm so sorry.
It's okay. No worries.
Just trust this to happen to me.
It happens to everybody.
It should be opening up.
Okay. You
Is
just
that
have
work?
the screen show, but don't have to do this because okay, screen show.
Yeah.
All right, you're there already.
Yeah, I
Don't
just want to make sure it goes into
don't don't
presenter.
don't do
Is
that.
it,
Ah,
is it still doing it? Can
yeah.
I ask you a favor? Is Gemma able to do it and I'll run to work?
Come
So
again?
it'll do
Oh,
quickly
Gemma, do
from
it
there.
first. All right,
Yeah,
Gemma.
is that all right? Because I'll leave home and I'll quickly go to work and it'll be 5 minutes away.
Uh, Gemma, are you online? All right, Gemma, could you do your presentation
Yep,
first?
I'm here.
All right.
I'm so sorry.
Don't worry. Let me share my screen, make sure mine works as well.
Okay. This is the blessing of having a webinar and friends joining
Yeah.
in. We can cover one another.
Okay. Can everybody see that screen?
Yes, it's full screen now.
Good, it's working. Okay.
Go ahead.
Alhamdulillah. Let's just move you guys out the way, otherwise I won't be able to see what I'm saying. There we go. Okay, so this morning, I'm Gemma Ali. I am the founder of the Halal Animal Welfare Association here in the UK. My background is in livestock rearing and sciences, animal welfare, and I'm currently studying my PhD in agriculture as well. So I look at the halal supply chain before slaughter. So the majority of people have their expertise at slaughter and processing and packaging. Mine is before that part of the supply chain. Today, I'm going to talk about the role of skilled labour in ensuring halal integrity in animal sciences and farming for our sector. So, as an introduction, if we look at the definition of halal integrity, it basically ensures that all aspects of animal science and farming align with our Islamic dietary laws and ethical considerations that we are advised to adhere to within Islam, and treating Allah's other creations with respect as well, no matter what we use them for. So it's significant for us to have skilled labour because our trained professionals, they play a crucial role in maintaining halal standards throughout our supply chain, from rearing all the way to processing, even after that, during packaging, making sure that everything abides by the standards that we would like things to be produced to within the supply chain, and as well as from a consumer point of view as well. So the objectives of my presentation, inshallah, I will explain halal principles in animal farming, discuss the roles of skilled labour in maintaining halal integrity, highlight any challenges. I have a couple of case studies as well with countries that are doing this fairly well and getting a global reputation in doing so. So, halal animal science. So there are many hadith, and there's different parts of the Quran that actually speak about animal welfare and treatment and uses. So just some that are quite well known is, oh, you have believed, eat from the good things which we provided for you and be grateful to Allah if it is indeed Him that you worship. So being grateful for the animals and also the crops that we grow and the food that we're able to make for that. And He's only forbidden to us our dead animals, blood, the flesh of swine, and that which has been dedicated to other than Allah as well. So these are the main, if you do not deviate to the other hadith and other parts of the Quran, then these two are the main points that we will follow. We are given specific species which we cannot consume, and the use of animal derivatives as well. So some non-Muslims are not aware that actually we can't eat things like gelatine from animals that aren't halal slaughtered. or if they have pork in them. This is always quite a surprise to my colleagues at work because they will often buy sweets or some sort of confectionery, and I say, oh, I can't eat that. It's got beef in it, it's not halal, or it's got pork in it, and they're not aware of that. So, but now awareness and education is reaching the non-Muslim markets as well. So when it comes to food production, if people want to reach our markets, whether it's farm level or confectionery or any other industry, they're now becoming more and more aware of this and changing production processes. We're also commanded to eat what is tayyib, so that wholesome, pure and clean food. A lot of the time, this is referred to as like a food safety standard, but now the research papers mention tayyib as the animal rearing process as well. So what the animal's being fed, how often it's having medicines, what they're being used for. Some papers have animal welfare and tayyib as separate, some have it combined. I guess they can't make up their mind whether it is tayyib rearing or not. So, but a lot of the time it is a combined expression of having halal and tayyib meat to consume. So our key aspects of halal farming, animal welfare and ethical treatment, including mental and physical needs, need to be considered, as well as the use of medicine. So this is different in the country policy around the world, depending on where you are, and of course the demographic of the country and the conditions. So in the UK and in Europe, we can't have the routine use of antibiotics. And we are trying to work really hard to not contribute to antibiotic resistance. However, we have to understand that other countries around the world, in their production systems, this may be a necessity. But we need to try hard to actually have our skilled and trained professionals to house the animals and look after them in their husbandry as best as we can before we resort to using, routine medicines that are then down the line affecting the environment, affecting human and animal health. I'm sure we're all aware, especially after COVID times, we don't want that antibiotic resistance because then we can't treat our superbugs. But it's a case of just working with other production systems in other countries to maybe look at places and areas of animal husbandry we can improve, but sometimes it is a necessity. But it's not just about animals being treated as a commodity. They're not just a thing. Allah has taught us that animals have sentience, so we need to be considering this in our supply chain. We should ensure that our feeding guidelines have no haram or forbidden substances. There is halal certification for animal feed, I believe under CIMIC as well. In some cases, this is voluntary, but again, another thing that may come down to government policy, inshallah, not in your countries, but here in the UK, there has started to be a little bit of conversation about whether they're going to use pork proteins in animal feed, which obviously affects the halal market. So we then have to respond to these discussions and say why we can't have this in our supply chain. It's not in place at the moment, but it's just being aware that our government policies, maybe outside of your halal certification, can affect the processing of the animal, which actually down our supply chain doesn't fit in with our halal criteria. So we have to be quite transparent and active as well in looking at those government consultations. And of course, our proper slaughtering methods as per Islamic jurisprudence, which our halal monitoring committees and bodies will have a list of requirements that we have to adhere to for the halal slaughter to be accepted. So skilled labour in halal integrity itself. So by skilled labour, we mean individuals with specialised knowledge in halal animal husbandry, welfare of animals, handling, veterinary science, slaughtering, and of course that halal compliance. It goes all the way along the supply chain. So halal integrity and animal welfare, they can become compromised if staff are not trained correctly. Yes, you could have very skilled farmers that have been working on farms all their lives, but but maybe they haven't got formal training in animal behaviour and welfare. It's just a case of it's part of their culture and community, and they've grown up on a farm. But then they wouldn't necessarily know veterinary science in depth, because again, that's more of a specialised training where you go to vet school. And then for slaughtering, most countries will have a government policy where you need to be a competent slaughterer, you need to have a licence. But just because you maybe have gone through formal training or grown up on a farm and had handling experience, maybe you went to vet school, maybe you have a slaughterman licence, doesn't necessarily mean they have the halal jurisprudence knowledge 100% to be able to fulfill that whole supply chain. So it could become compromise along the supply chain if we don't have good collaboration with each other and understand each other's knowledge to get that full halal integrity from our skilled labour as well. So we have different categories of skilled professionals along our supply chain. So we will have our farmers ensuring ethical treatment and feeding practices, and understanding the rules around mixed production. So that's for non-Muslim countries. I sometimes get questions from farmers who have mixed production asking me what they should do if they rear pigs as well as maybe sheep that go for halal slaughter. So they need to understand those rules about what they can and can't do, how they should be separating that production. Can they put the sheep in that housing after the pigs? What's the protocol? How do they wash the animals before slaughter? How do they change their clothing? So this is more for the non-Muslim countries. But if those countries want to enter our halal market, they need to understand those rules that we have in place. And we, of course, have our vets who look after our welfare assurance, and also the health and safety of the meat that we consume and the animals along the supply chain. They will visit the farms, and of course, then when they're at the slaughter stage, they have to make sure that we are abiding by food safety standards, and there's not any biosecurity breaches as well. Here in the UK, we have welfare assurance schemes which ensure animal health and compliance. These are usually private companies, so around the world, other countries will have these in place as well. So over here in the UK, we have like the Red Tractor and RSPCA. So farmers can pay to join these schemes and have a set of standards, a bit like your the halal certification. You can then put their label or their advertisement on your product to say that you meet these certain welfare standards. Okay, this is now becoming more and more important here in the UK for halal consumers. They are now starting to look for Red Tractor and RSPCA or some sort of welfare standard for their halal meat. Whereas before they focused mainly on the halal certifier. As generations are getting younger, they're becoming more aware of animal issues in production, maybe due to social media. They're discussing this a lot more. So now they are actually looking for those labels and that welfare assurance for the life of the animal. I did like a presentation the other day, and I was talking about some of my research that I'm doing recently, and it's starting to show that actually younger generations that are non-Muslim are actually more concerned with how the animal is raised rather than how the slaughter has been done. So they're not actually concerned about whether their meat is halal or kosher or not if they're non-Muslim, but they are looking for those rearing practices. And actually a lot of younger consumers will buy the religious slaughtered meat because they have a feeling that it's more, it's cleaner and the animals are better looked after. It's becoming this slight shift in the next generations, which is a good thing for us, especially if it drives our halal market. But it's something that we should focus on with our skilled professionals, definitely. Our slaughterhouse workers are, of course, trained in Islamic slaughter methodology, and they will have their certificate of competency licenses as per country. And then we have our halal inspectors ensuring adherence to halal certification standards. These will differ depending on which certifier they choose to use along the supply chain. So religious and ethical responsibilities of our skilled labour. We need to ensure that all halal practices and principles are maintained at every stage of our supply chain. Sometimes we can have challenges here, especially if you are relying on maybe part of the chain being non-Muslim, or if there's some sort of break in the chain or some sort of regulation change. This can sometimes affect the principles and the halal integrity, and it may get to the end of the line and actually a product's not halal suitable, unfortunately. So we just have those ethical responsibilities to make sure that things are being kept within our religious guidelines along the way, and maybe not putting money over religious standards. Sometimes there may be those in the supply chain that think, oh, it's just on the cusp of what we need. Let's just keep processing this particular line of product or service. But actually, we should be quite picky about this and want that really in-depth halal integrity in our products, which, alhamdulillah, we seem to maintain. Of course, avoiding contamination with haram elements. Some non-Muslim countries may have slaughterhouses or production lines where pork is processed or things with alcohol in. We need to have that full washing of those areas. This is handled relatively well once we get to our slaughter stages and onwards. Of course, there's some countries that don't allow pork production and slaughter to be anywhere near non-halal. And of course, upholding honesty and transparency in our certification processes. We do unfortunately have some aspects of halal fraud and labelling misuse. This is where our skilled labour should have that God consciousness. Okay, at the end of the day, we are Muslim, we answer to Allah, so we should be looking after each other, especially where our food is concerned, because our food is our fuel, it's going inside our bodies. Now, this is becoming more and more apparent. So artificial intelligence is now being set to develop and help monitor halal processing. It could potentially replace humans in some aspects. So our training here needs to develop to give skilled persons an understanding of how AI is going to work, where it's going to be implemented. At the end of the day, AI is a set of algorithms. It is a robot. I use it quite often at work, and sometimes I think when I reread what it's written or research for me, I think, that's not quite what I was looking for. It is amazing. It's a very good innovation. But when it comes to our halal integrity, we need to make sure that these algorithms are picking up what we need. This is where we're going to reach a bit of a challenge, because I was saying the other day that you can do a degree in veterinary science, you can do a degree in farming. They will go through precision livestock farming. They will start to look at this technology and AI, but at the end of the day, you're not a programmer. Being a programmer and writing algorithms is a completely different industry. It's a completely different set of skills. So it's something to consider, and maybe start working with maybe the next generation who are studying these things to get them involved in the halal industry, so we can then have that robust integrity where we fully understand what AI is doing in our halal industry, and we have those experts as well to intervene when things aren't quite as we want them to. So rearing practices. So that ethical treatment of animals, so potentially the tayyib concept, or animal welfare on its own. So the most well-used hadith, verily Allah has prescribed excellence in all things. If you slaughter them well. So this is where our slaughter standards start coming into play, by treating the animal well when they go to slaughter. As soon as they reach those lorries and they start being handling to go to slaughterhouses, their environment is changing. There's new smells, new sounds. They are scared. So we have been taught in Islam to consider the changes that the animal's going through. You know, yes, we heard them. They're mute. We don't understand what they're maybe saying to each other or to us, but just to have that consideration, that we need to still be kind to them, even all the way up to slaughter. And when we slaughter them, quickly and painlessly as possible, with the name of Allah. And they should be given proper food and water and space during their lives. Many countries have their Animal Welfare Acts. Here we have Animal Welfare Act 2006. And we have many animal rights companies or corporations that will look at our production systems and the way we process livestock, and they will raise issues and bring them to light so then we can change policy or create some sort of guidelines as well. Ideally, the act of slaughter should be no more stressful than handling on the farm. So this applies to all industries, halal or not. And it has been proven, there is a paper, which maybe I can share after the presentation, where they have proved that it is possible to carry out slaughter of an animal with the same stress level of actually handling them on the farm. Okay, so there might be an initial spike of stress levels measured by chemicals or heart rate, but they can stay the same and not be elevated at slaughter. There is ways to do this, which slaughtermen and animal handlers will be trained in. So those feeding guidelines again, so the prohibition of haram ingredients, so swine-derived feed, blood meal and non-halal additives. There is an emphasis on natural and organic feed, depending on the production system. Generally, sheep and cattle, their meat quality is better and their well-being if they're grazing on grass. Obviously, you may not have the weather or the terrain to do such things, so there are alternatives in place. Halal should aim for the higher standard of this. If they're a grazing animal, we should be allowing them to graze for the majority of their life. It improves their health and welfare, and it improves our meat quality as well. So the housing standards, these should give a minimization of animal stress and humane handling. They should be allowed to perform natural behaviours within their housing. So that is a consideration per species, depending on the age and size of the animal. They may need separate housing, especially when it comes to breeding seasons. The males may need to be moved, or as it causes them additional stress if they're right next to the females. And compiling with those ethical farming practices as well, following those Animal Welfare Acts. Specialised training is needed to understand how to manage animals without causing unnecessary stress. I think the halal industry would start to benefit from training in maybe animal behaviour, welfare, ethics, and sentience of animals, specific to the species, to actually understand how they behave. So there was a study done where they were looking at how animals react to blood, especially in a slaughterhouse, because if it was us as humans and we were put into a slaughterhouse and we saw somebody else being slaughtered, we don't like the sight of blood. We get very scared. Some people will have panic attacks, when actually animals don't actually respond to the sight of blood. They don't know what it is. They don't seem to have any sort of recognition for this on the offset. They're more looking at how the animal behaves, which is why in Islam we are given the guidance and the command to not let animals see each other being slaughtered. It's not a nice thing to see. They pick up from pheromones, the hormones, the behavior, the sounds of the animal, but blood itself they don't seem to react to, which is an interesting concept. So training. So there are many courses on Islamic jurisprudence relating to animal husbandry and slaughtering. Slaughtering is the main focus, and the Welfare Act slaughter be develop a little bit further for those who go and actually study agriculture and farming. Maybe we could start including halal slaughtering practices into that. When you're in a non-Muslim country, obviously this is harder to do. It will be the one-off talk or presentation. But then some of the Muslim countries may have this a little bit more developed, but it's definitely something that is important to have in those training programs. That hands-on training for halal certification processes, and training in animal welfare and husbandry, including behaviour. So having a bit more hands-on training as well. There's lots of online courses that will discuss these and run through the requirements, including your welfare assurance and quality standards. But having hands-on training is very, very different, and seeing things face to face rather than just being online. So we have our existing certification programs. So our halal certifiers and councils, they offer training in halal theory and slaughter. And there's training in physical animal husbandry and handling. This generally could be a specialised subject outside of this. Things are improving. The problem is it's very hard to get a large number of people to go to a slaughterhouse and watch a slaughter or be on a farm because they are a production process. They have certain protocols, especially having outside people inside those areas for biosecurity control, also just the general health and safety of having people in those places. But maybe it's something that we could work with and collaborate with farms and slaughterhouses and universities or training providers to actually have a bit more hands-on training. And that continuous education. So it's important for refresher training slaughterhouse workers and farmers. Things are changing all the time. There's new discoveries. I know some people think, oh, animal scientists, you just punch out research that you find and have this idea, but actually some of it is integral to actually changing our processes. And having those regular audits by halal authorities as well help to uphold our standards. So when we need to look at our certification and quality assurances, of course, we have our halal certification bodies that do this. We also have global standards such as ISOs, your CIMIC standards, GSO. These are used especially for those non-Muslim countries who want to export into Muslim countries or reach out into the halal market. They can abide by these standards to allow international trade, especially if production or welfare standards are lower than that country. So, for example, Brazil exporting to the UK, if they can show that they abide by these quality assurance standards, then we will allow that international trade. And it's about being inclusive and allowing that import and export, especially to meet supply and demand as well. But again, that monitoring compliance, so regular audit checked by trained inspectors along the supply chain, and the use of modern tracking technologies. There's a big uptake now of blockchain for traceability, where it's a huge database, and we're now using technology to input each stage of our supply chain, so you can trace back the quality. You can't have a break in the chain. It's helping to stop halal fraud and labeling fraud. You can see exactly where something's come from. So maybe if there's a disease outbreak or some cross-contamination, you can see the step of the chain before. So blockchain is becoming a really important technology. And that collaboration with farm welfare assurance schemes as well. To get that full farm to fork assurance. The consumers are looking for this now. They're not just looking for the halal stamp anymore. So challenges, if I just bring this up for you. So shortage of skilled labour. So having a lack of trained professionals in halal farming and slaughtering. As generations are moving forward, this is a less sought after field. It'd be interesting to hear from maybe some of the others in the industry, especially in your halal, like in your Muslim nations. How much do the next generation look for halal careers? What parts of the halal industry are they going to work into? So if we're also in a demand of an industry that has that demand for technology training as well, as that skilled Islamic knowledge for that halal integrity, there's a lot of scope here. I personally am worried that the next generation, they don't want to learn slaughter, they don't want to learn farming. These are hard industries, they are long hours, they are mucky, they maybe don't pay so well, so they're not really seeking these skills. So then we are relying more and more on non-Muslims to produce our food, but maybe there's some way we can get the youth on a drive to go and actually study halal sciences and study halal farming, but also those that are interested in AI and technology and the Islamic knowledge, somehow bringing them all together to keep their industry going so it doesn't fade out in 10, 20 years time. Another challenge, of course, is mislabeling and fraud. So unfortunately, we do have products that are falsely claimed to be halal or the production method. We do need stricter regulatory enforcement along the chain. However, those are concerned with handing things over to governments, especially in non-Muslim countries, because we need still a bit of control around this. Too much red tape, too much legislation makes things difficult for us. But our standards ourselves, having that harmonisation as well, can help to enforce this. Unfortunately, we do have inconsistencies still along different countries and supply chains. So ideally, we want to work for that unified global halal standard, working with each other. Obviously, some things are influenced by demographic, but working around these with each other. Some example of those AI technologies, just in case anyone was wondering, they use things like sensors to monitor animal behaviour. They will it looks at whether they've been feeding or not. They'll have collars on, or CCTV cameras monitoring algorithms of how much they ate, how often they ate, how much they moved, have they got lameness. It could be breeding, so you can attach devices to see if they're going to give birth, and you get a text message rather than having to sit in a field. The algorithms can detect haram substances in our production lines, and also that blockchain as well for that traceability. So these are all being developed, and the technology is developing very, very quickly. So it's a case of aligning those algorithms and standards within the robot versus our halal integrity. Some have the view that the human eye is best, and we still need human involvement, which, yes, is a given. And obviously, implementing technology can be expensive as well. So it's just things to consider going forward. So some case studies. From a Muslim perspective, Malaysia is known for its rigorous halal certification through JAKIM, and they export a significant amount of meat. Animal welfare on the farm is relatively good standards because they follow World Animal Welfare Organizations, as well as having good country policy themselves. They have their trained slaughtermen that follow those strict halal procedures, which ensure animals do not have unnecessary stress. And they comply with global halal standards as well. So they will align with Gulf Cooperation Council and OIC as well. This increases consumer trust. So generally, if a halal consumer hears that it came from Malaysia, they have that reputation and that standard that their halal products are fully in line with Islam. And this gives a good consumer reputation, especially for export opportunities, but also in the tourism sector. More and more Muslims, we want to visit Malaysia because we have a very good halal lifestyle while we are traveling out in Malaysia. New Zealand, so this is becoming a non-Muslim country kind of standard for halal production. So they have good animal welfare standards, and they have a robust halal monitoring system. So their national certifiers will work together in harmony to actually give a country halal standard. So where a lot of countries will have individual certifiers to export, they have a country halal standard. Okay, so this allows successful exports for halal meat, and it's widely accepted as well. So they are a good example. Actually, Dr. Awal has actually just been to New Zealand, so he will know more about that subject than I do. Maybe he can enlighten us all if he's not stuck in an airport somewhere. And the EU, UK and Australia as well, we have good animal welfare standards, some of the highest in the world at policy level. Okay, so that's at government level. And we also have halal certification, which is recognised for export. However, we do have challenges in the supply chain and with halal fraud within our countries. So I think we'd benefit from more collaboration and better labelling for consumer trust as well. And just having a bit more compassion and integrity within each other as well, actually domestically within the country to get these standards even better. So I bring this up. So the future of skilled labour, so technology advancements, again, that blockchain and artificial intelligence and quality control, maybe the halal certifiers or those that provide training can start to get some more technology experts about this, explain what it does. So integration of halal training in agricultural and veterinary sciences curriculums, and collaborate with global universities, Muslim and non-Muslim. And you know what, it doesn't even need to be at degree level. I have talented students at even diploma level, so the ages of 16 to 18, that work and grow up on farms. They want to know more about this halal industry because inevitably when they inherit their farms from their parents, They want to reach into a halal market and make their businesses better. So having some of that halal training, especially in the non-Muslim sector, can be beneficial. Of course, we do have like UNISA Brunei, who have Halal and Tayyib Research Centre. There's places in Indonesia and also Malaysia. But I think it could be global collaborations in education sectors as well, especially if this industry is going to grow more and more. And we have our growing demand of halal products, so expanding obviously to Europe, USA, and Asia more and more. So we need those skills professionals in all these countries to meet those rising halal consumer demands for next generations as well. So just key takeaways about skilled labour is essential for halal integrity from farm to table, and having training and certification. We need to keep expanding these and updating them, and having our regulatory bodies to standardise and enforce halal compliance to try and stop that fraud. Strengthening partnerships, I'd say, is one of my main recommendations, especially between like governments, religious authorities, and academic institutions as well. And having those international training centres as well. I know it's hard enough to try and collaborate all of the halal certification bodies, so trying to work on halal training centres as well is a whole nother project, but maybe inshallah in time we can do this. And there's my contact details if you would like to get in touch with me.
All right. Thank you very much, Gemma, Sister Gemma. Very interesting coverage. And I guess, Nadia, you are keen to then talk about Aussie's, the case study. Gemma didn't mention anything about Aussie's, what do you call that, the slaughtering sector, right? So I'm sure you have some good things there that you can share afterwards. Yeah, unfortunately, me too. I'm more keen on New Zealand because I did visit the New Zealand industry when I first started the journey in halal. I didn't have the chance to visit Australia, so I don't know. Hopefully, you can share more about that, Nadia. But the other thing, Gemma, before you I'm also sharing your concern about the next generation, right? And you had earlier shared with me the what do you call that? The survey that you wanted to then put as a study for your next presentation, international, what do you call that? Seminar or something like that in Bosnia, right?
Yeah.
So you still have time if you need more survey results, survey respondents, perhaps you can share the link at the message. Then you can get more
Yes, I can do
respondents.
that. Yeah.
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 Could
I think
could
I will eventually do a research paper with the next generation to ask them if they are willing to work in the halal sector. The problem is, if you start to survey students, especially at school level, there's safeguarding and parental controls that need to be given. So it becomes harder to ask them. But inshallah, I can find a way to do this on a mass scale to find out the interest of working in our sector.
that would be great. So without further ado, thanks Gemma for a good presentation. And so without further ado, I'll hand the mic over to Nadia, please. I hope this time around, all the best. Can see the full presentation.
I'm just going to do normal.
Yeah,
Let me get rid of everyone.
yeah, that would be great.
Oh, I'm
Okay.
so sorry about that. I really do apologize. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And I really appreciate Miss Gemma for stepping in for me so I could run to work. So I'll be talking about the history of halal certification in Australia. Australia is basically one of the world's top exporters of halal certified goods. Its multi-million-dollar halal industry was developed from Islamic societies formed through Muslims who immigrated to Australia, and then through transport, communication, obviously Australian governance, and agricultural produce to meet Muslim consumer demands worldwide. So let's get into the introduction, if it's going to work today. Yes, it is. So In evaluating Australian history, characteristics arise to determine the different periods in which halal certification developed in Australia. The history can be divided into 4 periods, being pre-halal certification, development of halal certification, the globalization and standardization of halal certification, and the modern day challenges. And I do believe Miss Gemma actually touched on a few of the same issues that we do have here in Australia as well. So this period, the pre-halal certification period, it actually spans 470 years. It focuses on what needed to be present for halal certification to take place. Muslims, transport, communication, produce is required. It signifies the Industrial Revolution, the Great Depression, both world wars, and obviously when that was occurring, it was international border closures that affected trade. So let's take it all the way back to the 1600s. And so that you can understand the Australian landscape, it should be noted that Australia has native Australians known as Aborigines and Torres Strait Islanders who were present for 40,000 years prior. So in 1606, the Dutch East India Company discovered the north coast of Australia, but the Dutch didn't believe there was anything of value for international trade. Now, prior to 1606, there was evidence of Portuguese, Chinese, Spanish, and Arabs landing in Australia. However, their presence was for exploration rather than trade. So one of these was actually the Caliph of Damascus. Technologically, by the 15th century, magnetic compass tools for navigation developed and improved the advancement of cartography. So this actual navigation tool would prove to be a key for Australia in developing international trade so shipments took place. And the reason why we're looking at this is without this type of trade, without any of the factors that are needed for international trade, especially from Australia, we need to kind of look at what was required prior. So the earliest trade known for Australia was with a Muslim country in 1650. So with the Macassans, and I've put a little picture here of Makassar, it's an East Indonesian Muslims. So from Makassar, they would travel south on fishing boats to the north and northwestern coast of Australia to fish for sea cucumbers, tortoises, and pearls. So these sea cucumbers were like an Asian delicacy for the Chinese. And so Australian natives would also travel by boat to Indonesia, Singapore, and the Philippines to trade goods such as tortoises and tools, and even some non-halal products such as alcohol and tobacco. So this was the first trade known in Australia. So due to the overcrowding of jails, the British settled in Australia in 1788 by transporting approximately 850 convicts to Australia. Australia's manufacturing was massively supercharged in the 1800s by the enormous scientific, the engineering, the communication, and the transport advances that were occurring in the Industrial Revolution. And considering Australia was becoming self-sufficient, or basically at that time, it was dependent on shipments to be made to Australia, but it became self-sufficient. So not only was Australia able to produce for the locals, they were able to produce for the international trade. So it made it really healthy for halal trade and certification to be possible. However, at the time, companies transporting goods would also have to consider the length of time, what they're transporting, and whether it was safe to eat. So the next type of factor that was definitely needed was refrigeration. And something that some probably won't realise how Australia revolutionised this for the whole world. So in 1827, the first refrigeration ships left Australia's Tasmanian colony to sell its produce of apples to London. The development of refrigeration enabled for more goods to be traded overseas, which meant for Muslim countries and non-Muslim countries, there was more opportunities. So in 1836, the first domestic live sheep shipment went from the Tasmanian colony to the Victorian colony. And then in 1845, the first shipping went from international, from the Western Australia to Singapore and Mauritius, Singapore being attached to Malaysia at the time, which was a Muslim country. International trade via shipping promoted wealth for Australia, even more so when in 1851, the gold rush in Bathurst started, which is the little red part on the Australian map that it's just there. It saw multiple people immigrating, including Muslims, to capitalise on the gold rush. This saw doubling of wages, raising of animal prices, and it basically made Australian beef and sheep a commodity, basically to the rest of the world. In 1876, a successful shipment of frozen meat went from Argentina to Le Havre, France. It used ammonia-fueled refrigeration, but unfortunately the meat was not safe to eat. In Queensland in Australia, they were so inspired by this shipment and with the wealth of the gold rush and, of course, the Industrial Revolution, they were able to develop air-dried refrigeration. And the first shipment left from Melbourne to England, and it was frozen beef and mutton, and it was safe to eat. So Australia's development in shipping refrigerated frozen meat absolutely revolutionised worldwide shipping and set the tone for future shipments of halal certified goods and meat, especially from Australia, which would still be 150 years later. So, still in the pre-certification period, but with the gold rush already in full swing, the Industrial Revolution behind us, we actually start looking at immigration. It became extremely evident in the 1860s to 1920s when the first Muslim camel drivers, known as cameleers, entered into Australia. Now, they were mainly from Afghanistan, some from India, some from Pakistan, and even Malaysians in the 1880s. So the Aborigines intermarried with Afghanis and Malays as they shared the mannerisms, the environments, and the beliefs. But naturally, Islamic settlement resulted in mosques being built, and the earliest known mosque was built in Maree, South Australia. It would have been 1860. The British wanted Aboriginals to convert to Christianity. However, Islam gave an alternative for Aboriginals to connect with their heritage and allowed for tribalism and equality to continue. So these mosques would prove to be critical for halal certification as they would later contribute as halal certification bodies in Australia. So these cameleers, they built train lines from North to South Australia and telegraph lines that connected Australia to the rest of the world. So without the groundwork undertaken by the Muslim cameleers, trade with international countries, including Muslim countries, would not have been possible for Australia at this time. Telecommunication and transport allowed for further immigration of Muslims into Australia, especially with the news of the gold rush. So yes, even the Muslims were really interested in the gold. And they came to Australia, and predominantly they were Lebanese who immigrated in about 1880. And at this time, Lebanon was connected to the Ottoman Empire. So they were predominantly Turks that came. So the first extant mosque, which is still operating today, was in Adelaide, Australia in 1888 to 89. And the Cameleers raised money in 1905 to 1906, and they built the second extant mosque known as Perth Mosque. So both these mosques are halal certifiers 70 years later. So moving into the 1800s, let's look at how food and how it developed. Australian food was basically increased from 6.8% in 1880 and 33% in 1920, which was meat, grain, fruit, and butter. So during this period of colonisation, you can see that the trade was 5 times more, and Muslims with no doubt had a catalyst in this growth. So just to show you that change in that percentage change with the Muslims development in transport and communication for Australia. So this is important, as without the Muslims being here, we would also not have halal slaughter to be present, as Australia is a secular a secular country, and they can't enter into religious affairs. So let's get into where the legislation starts. The Commonwealth of Australia was basically, I think the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act in 1900s took effect on the 1st of January 1901. It established an Australian Parliament. With the colonies, it actually changed them from Australian colonies to Australian states, and this birthed many acts of meat legislation and many acts of normal legislation, including in non-meat in 1905 as well. In the early 1900s, as I said, meat acts were put in place. Non-meat was in 1905, and in 1913, there was a hygiene issue. You'd have butchers, they would have the meat swelling in their air. So this led to a handbook being written in 1925, and it was for meat inspectors and how to look for things, and it was like a training handbook. And this also led to a textbook for training and meat inspection and supervision in 1935. So also in 1935, to go with the textbook, was the Meat Export Control Act. And this was superseded in 1964. Thank you very much to Malaysia, who had a massive influence at the time, and we'll speak about this later. So this allowed for meat exports to the Middle East and to take place, to do their own slaughtering, because now but at this stage, Australia was actually exporting now to the rest of the world. But until that Meat Export Control Act was kind of put in place, the Middle East wasn't as much interested in Australia. So let's look at some key Muslims. So around the halal certification certifiers, we know that in 1945, South Africa has the first certification body. With regards to Australia, Muhammad Afif in 1948, he immigrated from Pakistan. He introduced halal meat export, and no doubt to Pakistan, but it didn't involve obviously halal certification. It was just more a service. So in 1956, Sadiq Bucks, or the late Sadiq Bucks, operated slaughtering processes for his business as well in Western Australia. So these are the two earliest evidences we actually have in Australia with regards to slaughtering taking place. And there's no doubt, obviously, halal slaughter was taking place for Muslims individually, but not from a perspective of actually trade. And it's the earliest trade that we've got to know at this present time. One of the most important things that starts the start of the certification period is that in 1957, the Islamic Society of Victoria established the first Islamic Centre in 1963, known as the Australian Federation of Islamic Societies, which leads us to the very beginning of the halal certification period. So I'm unsure if most people don't know this, but let's talk about the 70s and how Saudi Arabia introduced halal certification into Australia. So it was not really formalized until the 70s under the auspice of the Saudi Kingdom of, I was going to say Saudi of Australia, no, Saudi Arabia. The phase highlighted Muslim immigration due to the Al-Grazbi policy. Now, the Al-Grazbi policy is about multiculturalism in Australia, but it was about immigrating those that were non-English speaking. So this saw a large surge of Lebanese before and after the Lebanese War come into Australia. So this influx allowed for Muslims wanting to have halal slaughter and also desiring unity, spirituality through Islamic societies. So the introduction of these Islamic societies allowed these bodies to become halal certifiers. So in 1974, as I said to you, these two Saudi officials, they came to Australia, they visited every capital in the city, and they went to go and look for what was needed for the Australian community for the Muslims. And because they wanted to set them up to be self-sustaining so that they weren't asking for foreign investment. So what they did is they proposed a structural change for AFIS to become the sole halal certifier in Australia. The Saudi officials also felt that the Islamic societies at the time were specifically based on race or ethnicity, and they thought it should be based on geography. So basically, one for New South Wales, one for Victoria, one for Queensland. This led to AFES changing their name in 1974 to the Australian Federation of Islamic Councils, known as AFIC, which is a very well-known certifier in Australia. So in 1975, the Saudi Kingdom granted a decree for sole certification to AFIC that was circulated in 1976. The decree was only granted to Australia, as Australia had a controlled halal slaughter program, and unlike any country at that stage, and it's not to say that no other country didn't have a slaughter program, but it had the ideal requirements that the Middle East needed at that time. At this stage, 20% of the halal meat was being exported, with only 100,000 Muslims present in Australia at the time to Saudi Arabia. So in 1980, AFIC was then granted sole certification from the UAE and again for Kuwait in 1982. So Australia became a standout company, especially for the Gulf at this time. So you can imagine, we have mentioned that slaughtering services were operating 20 years prior. As I mentioned you, Halal Sadiq, there was Adelaide Mosque, there was also Brisbane Mosque. These services were still being operated 20 years prior to AFIC. So you can imagine it led to division when AFIC was given this sole certification. And obviously still we have some of this politics today, probably in every country now. So as we've stated, legislation was now instituted for 80 years, but with regard to the red meat industry. But the challenge for the 1980s left massive gaps that allowed for malpractice, bribery, substitution, and it would develop further into more legislation needing to be put through. So this led to the 1982 Woodward Royal Commission into the Australian meat industry, culminating from serious violations that were found in 1981. So basically this meant meat establishments were exporting meat that was not fit for human consumption, such as horse, buffalo, donkey, and kangaroo meat, known as pet food, and was sold as export beef, or mutton as lamb, cow as bull. And there was mislabeling products by relidding, bribery of government officials to turn a blind eye, as well as forgery of the meat transfer certificates. So Justice Woodward made a conclusion, or he made a judgment, and the following things that came about were that the Australian government had to be involved within halal certification and red meat export. Halal certifiers are required to audit periodically because red meat industry was not wanting to spend the money. They didn't want to be audited. The Federal Police and the Department of Primary Industry were blamed as it was based on an honour system, and AFIC was technically not qualified regarding the meat industry to look for gaps. So just as the standardization develops, it requires situations like this to then go, we've got some loopholes. One of the interesting ones that were brought down was that there was no monopolization for certifiers that was allowed to be present. And the Australian government and the halal certifier had to have a dual sign on the halal certificates. So, of course, this led to the Export Control Act of 1982, and it's actually gone through several amendments today, which is now the Export Control Act of 1920. So let's talk about the next chapter, which is the globalization and standardization. This is one of my probably favorite periods. Of course, the pre-certification is great too, but oh gosh, sorry about that. Moving it. I was just trying to get it away. Doesn't matter. It does. Okay, so with the halal certification emerging strongly in the 1970s and 80s, the next 30 years saw what was halal certified categorically shifting from red meat or from meat to food products or any other product that wasn't meat. So At this time, there was too many certifiers. So basically, Saudi had set up all these societies that were sitting underneath a council that was in Victoria or one in New South Wales. So what they decided was in Victoria, now the main body has to be the halal certifier, and all the ones underneath would no longer halal certify. And this would reduce the amount of halal certifiers in Australia. So if anyone knows ICCV or Sigma, they had ICCV have 12 societies underneath them. Now they would no longer halal certified and would be ICCV. So in 1992, Halal Helpline issued a supermarket guide, and this book set the tone for halal certified processed goods. So that meant products other than meat in Australia, which became food certification, it became extremely prevalent in 1993. So shortly after, accreditors from other countries other than Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, stepped in to license, such as Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia. So let's look at how legislation in Australia has actually been impacted based on technical regulations. And Malaysia has had a huge impact on Australian government legislation. So where countries have had an impact is that Malaysia introduced their animal rules in 1962, which amended our Export Control Act from 1935 to 1964. However, in light of the meat substitution racket that we just spoke about before in 1982, Malaysia issued meat regulations in 1982, which, based on the culmination of those violations that happened with the meat substitution racket in Australia, and therefore Australia changed their Export Control Act in 1982 based on that as well. So the amendments to Malaysia and influenced the Export Control Acts, and of course Saudi also. We've got now the Export Control Act Meat and Meat Products 2005, and now it's revised to 2021, along with Indonesia and Singapore. So basically, Malaysia issued their first technical standard on halal food in 2004, and it followed by Singapore and Indonesia in 2005. So you can see that export control orders were making those changes along with it, and mainly because in that food, Malaysia also included meat. So the export control orders of 2005 were very different. The Australian Halal program was put in place. It meant a Halal consultative committee with all stakeholders from the meat establishment was established. It was a request, which the beautiful Miss Rozi, actually we were discussing when we were in Malaysia last, actually requested a halal attaché from Malaysia to be present in Australia, which is currently Ustad Naim. So in 1999, of course, the World Halal Council, which was a group of all these certifiers, joined together. And from Australia, those original ones were ICCV, HCA, and AFIC. Malaysia, of course, had instituted 2007, the ISO standards. 2012 was Indonesia doing the same, and the introduction of the 2011 CIMIC standards. And of course, 2012 Pakistan standards, and of course the Gulf standards, where New Zealand and Australia were the guinea pigs for that amendment of the Gulf standards. So let's do a summary of how the halal certified goods till present is booming through Australia. So as we know, in 1974, halal slaughtered meat was present, and it involved halal certification. And in 1993, halal processed food began. And of course, once the food began, we needed cleaning materials in 1994. And in 1995, food supplements began. And in 1999, halal cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, and medicines. And in 2014, the anti-halal campaign started. So this was just a political party in 2014 wanting to take down the halal certification industry. They tried to bring about a Senate inquiry, but the Senate inquiry only just produced that it's a legitimate, like the halal certification is a legitimate, it's protected by the government and the industry. So in 2015, the pharmaceutical boom affected by the Gulf standards. So that was that amendment. So it had a huge pharmaceutical boom in Australia. In 2017, there was a huge kombucha boom. In 2018, there was vegan products wanting to be halal. And in 2024, in light of the new, the amended Indonesian standards, there's been a huge cosmetic boom here in Australia. So the what's worth here in Australia, and we've got to take a couple of years because they get all our figures put together. We're always a couple of years behind. So in 2020, Australia was the 4th largest exporter of halal food and beverage worldwide, totaling 15 billion in food and groceries. It's the 2nd largest in beef export and largest in sheep and goat, totaling 14.5 billion in halal red meat, which is approximately 30% of the total agricultural products exported from Australia. So as a result, 20% of Australians are involved in international trade, and that's 1 in 5 people making a significant contribution to halal. So in the last chapter, we look at consumer concerns. So some processes and some ingredients are hidden, obviously, like processing aids, and it basically leaves the consumer very confused. So based on literary concerns, labeling matters to Muslims, country of origin mattered to Muslims, as well as different schools. So when entering into Australia, they have different ethnicities and cultures, which leads to difference of opinions. Not to mention in Australian Muslim consumers, they're not aware of the halal standards that are prevalent overseas that are public, and they're not even really aware of the Australian federal government's red meat regulations either, and they're public. So there's a very clear gap of knowledge of the Australian Muslim consumers' perception of halal products and halal certification, and their level of reliance on halal certification. So these themes propagated the need for surveys to better understand the perception of reliance and of the Australian Muslim consumers towards halal certification. So when we look at, we did 1,040 1,040 surveys to the Australian Muslim product. Oh God, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. To the Australian Muslim public. And of course, Ms. Gemma mentioned before we had ethical issues. We couldn't go below 18 and we had to make sure that everyone was 18 and above. So we assessed their understanding of products, how they transfer their responsibility to the certifier and to other than those than a certifier, like a website or a person or a government. So some really interesting results were found. So 90% of the survey group had both parents born overseas. And this survey was very balanced between men and women. It was like 49-51, and 34% were born in Australia, whereas 66 survey applicants were born overseas. So the top 5 ethnicities were being Pakistan 17%, Lebanese 15%, Indian 10%, Turkish 8%, Egyptians 7%, and I think Malaysians even came at about 1 or 2%. So it was just very interesting, and it could just be that it's just the survey circle that went out, but we did try to get the whole of Australia. So when looking at immigration versus the school of thought, there's actually one person on this graph from the 1940s, which doesn't adequately show up on this graph. However, in saying that, from 1940 to 1989, 11% immigrated in this time, and 61% immigrated between 1990 and to today, and 27% were born in Australia. So with regards to the school of thought, Hanafi was 43%, and considering worldwide there's 45% Hanafis, it kind of gives a good cross-section. The very surprising amount was the Sunnis that just declared that they're just Sunni and they don't follow a school of thought at all, was 32%. Shafi was 16% in compared with the 18% Shafi worldwide, which was a good cross-section. And again, we had 2% Hanbali, which was again 2% Hanbali worldwide. Shia was 2.5%, 2% unsure. Maliki was 1.5%, which wasn't a great cross-section of the 15% that's present worldwide. Some just believed in Quran and Sunnah, which was 0.3%. Some just said, I believe in Muslim and in Islam, and that was 0.6%, and spiritual was 0.10, because we obviously had a bit of an open end of other if some were unsure. So when looking at the Australian Muslims and why they would eat, what they would eat if there was no logo or the word halal on the products, and 80.5% said they would definitely eat it. But we then asked an open-end question, and 75% said that they would check to see the labels to make sure it's vegan or it's suitably halal. And with 1.5% trusting the word of anyone that literally said this is halal. So basically, if a restaurant said documentation, they would trust that. 9% said that they would do their own research by contacting someone or going online. And 8% said that they wouldn't eat it at all. So in the next graph, we're showing a comparison between how the Muslim consumer decides a product is halal versus checking for the source of a certain ingredient, such as meat. So these are results. So you'll see that looking at the green parts on the graph, you'll see that looking for a halal certification, a logo, checking for haram ingredients on labels, and looking on websites on labels, on websites on labels is extremely high, which is the green. However, using halal apps and whether checking for the source of ingredients or whether something is halal was quite minimal. Invariably, in both cases of the orange and the green, contacting a family member or consumer line or a knowledgeable person was approximately the same. But the distinct differences were checking for the origin or the source of an ingredient on websites in the key area in Australian Muslims was on a website. So this just shows that brands really should advertise. For example, checking for the origin of meat, 78% would check for the source of an ingredient, especially if it was meat on a website, and 37% would actually contact the consumer line or the manufacturer. So this highlights that Muslim consumers do look for the halal logo and the cert and are trying to find on websites what is halal, especially with regards to the product, the actual consumer website. So some of the really interesting, and I can't show you a million other graphs and because we are up for time, but this highlights that Muslim, basically what I was going to say to you is we have some extra little insights into their what came out with the surveys, and it was really interesting. So 92% said that they would place the onus on the certifier, which is great for the certifiers and the governments. 64% believed red meat was mechanically slaughtered. 49% are affected by halal consumption of what is on social media and what is in the media. 3% believed penetrative stun is halal. 50% were unaware of the stun requirements in Australia for halal, and 53% disagree with certain ingredients because their madhab prohibits it, which highlights education is so important for consumers. So I'd like to say thank you so much. In conclusion, as I had said before, it would not be possible to appreciate the halal industry in Australia without understanding the development and how we even got here today, the importance of Muslim immigration, Australian technological and communication advancements, and the key aspects to the development of shipments for export meat, and the key characteristics evidenced in the 4 periods saw the growth of halal certification in Australia to what it is today, being worth $30 billion, which gives a rich array for food, for the diet, for the Muslim consumers. But no doubt the Australian federal government is invested in the huge export potentials of to protect its economy and trade by creating legislation for what we call a halal-friendly Australia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Alhamdulillah, I was happy that you took up my invitation to do the presentation on your survey and also on your PhD thesis about the Australian history, because truly interesting to me, and I hope the audience here also agree with me that it's a very eye-opening presentation. And I hope that further to my presentation yesterday, we will encourage more and more communities and countries, nations to document their halal journey. I salute you. You go way back to the 1600s. Wow, I only go back to 1964. Yeah, so it's really interesting, and yeah, you're now giving me a challenge to go back further. Yeah, because it's really interesting to find out what drives the halal industry for each country. And from Sister Gemma's presentation earlier, so I think you did catch some glimpse of how the UK start. Dr. Awal has messaged me to say that he is now on the way to the hotel. So hopefully he'll be able to join midway as our panel session. And with that, shall we start our panel session?
Yeah, it's up to you.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I've got a list of questions which I've shared with the presenters, panelists today. And I hope that the questions are challenging enough. And I hope also that it will spur the audience to then capture the essence and ask some more questions after this panel session during the Q&A so that we can have more inputs on the our quest for knowledge and our quest of sharing our experience so that it can be a basis for future what do you call that knowledge, the basis for our successors to then continue the halal integrity, upholding the halal integrity. All right, Sister Nadia, you mentioned the G2G just now,
Yes.
and I would say that it's it still needs more input from you. So could you elaborate on the specific harmonization challenges faced by HCBs, considering international trade and the varying standards, and how the Australian government has stepped in to assist, and what's the outcome?
Absolutely. So Australia has like a website specifically for all stakeholders in Australia. It's called the Manual of Importing Countries. And anything G to G, if there's any changes, it has to be notified to the Australian government. What often happens is standards do get changed. And what the Australian government does do is I know there has been a change to a standard worldwide and just recently, and our government basically put in place about 3 to 4 couple of hour sessions of video conferences with all stakeholders. And it was mainly because we would get a lot of influx of our clients contacting us for requirements specifically for this country's new standards or amended standards. And it was outside of the halal scope, and the Australian government completely stepped in, brought us all together, and we all collaborated with all the questions and even brought that government in. So it was quite amazing. It allowed us to also give the information that was also required to our clients that have nothing to do with us, specifically around trade, what documents required, not just the halal certificate, but other trade documents that needed to be done. So it's really quite an eye-opening task. So the Australian government will do anything to protect that Australian halal trade in Australia.
Could you elaborate further about the halal attaché that Malaysia has? I mean, is it the only one?
Absolutely.
Is it the only one that has the halal attaché,
I do
or is any other
believe
country that
so.
has a halal attaché?
I do
Yeah.
believe so. We are really blessed. So we have our little Jackim here in Australia, in Canberra. At the moment, it's Ustad name, and he basically, as we know, DVS and Jackim come out to audit our meat establishments, and basically once a year we're all audited by Jackim or that halal attaché at all times, and we've got someone to always talk to, ask questions, say we've got a problem with this client, and they're just there all the time. So it's really, really good. So we're really
Yeah. Did you
such a
know
minority Muslim country.
did you know that the current Director General of Jakim, Datuk Siraj, was the first halal attaché?
He was. He
Yeah.
actually, and then there was Ustad Astri, is that right?
Yeah, Asri, and then before
And
Naim was Ustad.
Izam.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
Izam Paddle and now Ustad Naeem.
yeah. So was this attaché at the request of the Australian government?
I think so. I
Yeah.
believe so. When
Yeah.
in our talks, yes. And I believe it probably would have come out on that export in that 2005 where the halal program, it's called AHGPH. I think it is something like that. Oh no, I've mixed that up with BPJPH. But it's called the Australian Halal Government Program. So we've got it specifically. It's kind of a triangle where the Australian government will approve the meat establishments manuals and approved arrangements, and the certifier will, the Australian government will also approve the certifier, and the certifier will approve the meat establishment. So it's kind of like a triangle of compliance.
Mm.
And of course, the Australian government probably gets ordered by Jakim.
Yeah, that's great. I believe that more documentation can be done on this, and considering this International Health Conference is I would call it supported by SMIC. Um, your presentation can also be something that can be presented or highlighted to His Excellency Mr. Ihsan, so that something can be done within this MIC and OIC that can emulate Australia's Malaysia G2G cooperation in strengthening the halal integrity. Yeah,
Yes,
I hope
yes.
it can be that. Yeah, good, good. So, Sister Gemma, in your interest, your presentation about animal sciences and farming was quite great, and your concern about the skilled labor is also my concern now after you highlighted it. It really didn't cross my mind about it because I'm not in Malaysia and things are being handled by Jakim. And the thing is that I would say again, Alhamdulillah, I mean, this is a SMIC supported event that we can also bring this up to the attention of His Excellency, so that more skilled laborers in this area, or what we can do to make the next generation be interested in upholding the halal integrity despite this part of the halal chain being so onerous, taxing, and the with all the blood and all that. So what do you think that we can do to address harmonization challenges and preparing for the next generation via this harmonization?
I think initially we would have to actually do some research into the next generation's view of working in these industries. And I mean, here in the UK, farming and slaughter and things like that, they're not part of school curriculum. They'll focus basically on the English, maths, and science and history. Obviously, there is the age concerns. You don't want to be talking about slaughter to younger children, but then it becomes more of a choice once you pass the age of 16. So, first of all, I think doing some research and maybe comparing between Muslim countries and non-Muslim to see what interest there is for those generations to work in the industry and where they would want to work. And then maybe doing some sort of like careers expos. I know we have lots of expeditions around the world and we have lots of conferences about halal in the industry and B2B and, export and trade and money making, but maybe we could include careers sections and actually encourage a younger set of visitors and educational institutions to actually attend maybe like an educational conference as well within those expeditions. And then speak with the certifiers and all the halal standards and people like Jekim and CIMIC, and maybe build some sort of courses and educational programs So then those that do have interest can actually attend specialized training courses or maybe even gain diplomas in halal industry. Of course, if they want to become academics, they can then continue to places like UNISA Brunei. But I think if we can harmonize the education as well, and include all these future trends, then ideally these expertise over time will be build up and it will minimize the risk of contamination of products or procedural errors because we will have people to take over our jobs when we are older, with the same integrity, but also with a modern view of what's going on in the industries. Trying to get the younger generations into those labor intensive jobs is hard. Lots of them just want to be, influencers and make lots of money just by making their reels on TikTok. But unfortunately, that's not a reality. And I think it's about raising education that they should be concerned. They should be very concerned that if they don't pick up where their parents or their grandparents left off, then they won't have a halal industry. It will just be handed over to authorities, and then they can't really have much of a say about their standards and production because they didn't want to be involved. So I think that it's about awareness, definitely, to then create that harmonization from our side to then pass down to that generation.
Correct. But what do you think about the involvement of scholars, the involvement of mosques in generating this interest on the halal industry?
I think that would be very important. There are certain sheikhs or scholars that are very active on YouTube, especially the younger generations. They like to watch people like Omar Suleiman. They like to watch Norman Ali Khan, Hamza Yusuf. There's some famous people, more famous scholars here in the UK who, especially during Ramadan as well, they will do series about Ramadan. And I feel like once they draw in that attention, they get the subscribers on their channels, the younger generations will continue watching their things. They have this respect for them. So they could help us potentially create some awareness about the halal industry and actually doing it as a job, and that it's not something that just happens in the background. It's something that we need to take control of as well. I think they could help us a lot. And madrasas as well. So the mosques themselves, when young people go to mosque, it's generally maybe like a Friday or if they're going for their Islamic education. So again, having somebody come in and do a talk and just plant that seed to begin with would be helpful.
Yeah. I would say in Malaysia also, we are starting to integrate the halal element into the whole Islamic knowledge. I'm glad, Alhamdulillah, that both the current DG and the one previously had been very involved in halal, and I believe that their experience in halal is driving how the education is being disseminated to the nation here. I think it's all a learning process, and I would say, and I would emphasize, like I did yesterday, that this sharing is a sharing of shared knowledge, shared experience. You may not experience it. I'm sharing so that then you can emulate it or adapt it. Wisdom at your respective areas, starting especially with non-Muslim majority countries or nations. It starts with your community first. So Alhamdulillah, I'm really happy with the theme of this year's International Halal Conference and the way that we are moving the discussion, that it can continue on with this Islamic Economy Academy that is the organizer of this event. We can work together for that. So next question, Sister Nadia again. How can HCBs leverage on the consumer insights to build trust and ensure compliance? especially considering evolving consumer expectations and the need to balance transparency with commercial pressures to retain the trust?
In Australia, the consumer expectations are definitely wanting more transparency. And it's around some of those are the Australian consumers believe that establishments or our clients should be disclosing the ingredient suppliers, which would be an IP issue, a breach of confidentiality. And there's that lack of understanding, even when it's brought to that attention. So I do believe a lot of education needs to be brought up around that. Also, another problem that we do have with consumers wanting that transparency is they do tend to rely on websites specifically that may be overseas. So they've immigrated here to Australia, but they're checking websites that are specific for other countries. And the way Australian products are made might be slightly different, such as tartaric acid. Where the way it's made in Europe, the way it's made here in Australia, and the way it's made in South Africa are totally different. So some of these things become, they want for transparency, but also there's this like really fine line. Sometimes if you give too much information, it leads some people into disarray, and others that just love it. So I do believe certifiers worldwide could put a lot more on websites and encourage their own clients to state that they're halal, because that's where Muslims are looking and that's what they want. And we're in an age of technology where they have the internet at the touch of their fingers. So
I would say transparency is very key. I believe some of the audience here are halal executives. The certified halal executive of Malaysia, Jakim, has certified them as halal executive. And knowing the process of the certification in Malaysia, one of the things that you need to make sure is that if you are using ingredients, it must be halal certified, and that the halal certification is valid and from recognized bodies. I remember when I was in the industry, it's a headache that time, 20 years ago, to get all these documents. I'm not quite sure about now, but I believe it is still onerous. But then hopefully that within the HCBs and JAKIM and all the other certification bodies, there could be some sort of a database, because even like when you are doing you're doing the certification of a finished product, you are depending on the ingredients, and then you have to get your client to make sure that they are halal certified. How are they because especially if you are small, how are you getting the valid halal certification from the supplier? They say you're so small, you only buy a small chunk. Why should I bother with providing you these documents, right? So how do you feel that HCBs can help to solve these issues?
Oh, I mean, for us, how we work, I mean, we definitely try to gain that. We definitely want a halal certificate for each ingredient. But you're right, you do come across some like farms that are in the middle of nowhere that are making eucalyptus oils. And you have to probably take what the farm is basically, it's just eucalyptus oil. And if they're not wanting to be, we could possibly go through statutory declarations to make sure that, what's your extraction of these oils? Is it with ethanol? Is it with steam distillation, propylene glycol, etc.? So, I mean, there are ways, but then there's extra controls put on place where, you would do some extra testing to also substantiate whatever you are going to do in that regard. But for such I would only do it on specific situations. I would never do it like, a meat flavor says, sorry, I can't get this halal certified. I'd be like, no way, I don't care. So every ingredient needs to be halal certified. So yeah, it is hard. And I do know this was very question is very important, especially I know that it also happens in Malaysia and Indonesia as well, where they're too small to have it, or I'm not too sure too much in Malaysia, but I do know that Elvina and myself have spoken about this subject in a year ago
Yeah,
or so. So yeah,
it is. It is. I sit in the presentation what do you call it, WhatsApp group of this Halal executive, and that they're asking, do you have this certificate? Can we share the certificate of this particular product? Because um, you know they just need it. They won't be able to get it from the supplier or even the importer that they are dealing with. But the requirement is that they must see the certificate. So these are the things that I would say that in Malaysia, I'm a producer, and I bought I'm buying ingredients which carries your logo, right? For the ingredients that is being produced in Australia, your
yeah,
logo is there. Your halal cert is there, and I'm depending on you that you have go back to ensure that the chain is not broken, the trust is not broken, right? So I mean, this is the thing that people need to be aware of, how the chain goes way back to the farm, and how we
agree.
are dependent about with each other on the certifications line. And yeah, I see that our brother Mahmoud and sister Elvina are here listening to this, and I hope our the next upcoming um, slots in the following days that involve these speakers or panelists, this can be discussed further. All right,
I
Sister
just wanted to
Gemma?
add, I
Yeah,
just
okay.
wanted to add something really quickly to that. Another way that we do actually get around it is just by offering it extremely cheap or almost free, so that we can get that halal certified. But so that's another option. But sometimes it all depends on how large the certifier and whether they can have that time or ability to do such a thing. I just wanted to say that.
Okay, great. Um, Dr. Awal has just contacted me to ask me for the link. Let's see whether he's able to join after receiving the link. We are still. I just let me message to him that we are waiting for him just to listen a bit about what he doesn't have to present, but maybe he can wait. We are waiting for to listen to your views. Okay. Right. So back to Sister Gemma. Um, how do you think the ethical consideration in halal livestock management impact consumer trust? Can you share some strategies or case studies that demonstrate successful integration of ethical consideration in halal livestock management?
Yeah, so the ethical livestock management, including obviously the humane treatment, reducing the stress, and ethical slaughter. If the consumer has the perception that all of this is adhered to, they are more likely to buy these products. That said, previous research that I've done, consumers well, I'm trying to think of my specific from my statistics now. 88% of the consumers that I surveyed about this said that the animal's life was just as important as the slaughter. Um, and there's been lots of ethical debate around happy life or happy death. They're alive a lot longer than they die. So there's that fine line there between having our ethical and high welfare at the halal slaughter, but obviously we need to include that in the supply chain before that. So consumers are very much driven by this now. It was consumers between the age of 18 and 35. So those consumers are predominantly those with maybe younger families, or they have their own disposable income. And like Sister Nadia was saying earlier, then they are the children or the grandchildren of the immigrants. So it may be that their older generations, meat and farming is very much just a cultural practice. It's just a commodity that people just eat. Whereas now we can afford to be a little bit more picky about what they buy. But consumers are concerned and very confused with labeling. And I often have to explain to them that If you want the rearing method, the slaughter method, what it's been fed, if it's halal or not, this is so much information to put on one label. I mean, how much time do they really spend standing there looking at a label? It needs to be carefully designed. But also, there is an element that consumers, due to economic conditions, especially since COVID, COVID made people very aware of animal disease and factory farming, and they got a taste of what happens if we have a disease outbreak. I think we can all safely say that this was not good times. So they have this moral and ethical consideration that they want these clean products, that the animals raised well, they don't want this disease outbreak. But at the same time, they are very much driven by preference and price. If I said to a halal consumer that you can have a very high welfare chicken, but that organic chicken is going to cost you £20 versus getting 4 for £10, people unfortunately are still defaulting to the cheaper option. Okay, so consumers want best of both worlds. They want this consumer confidence that they have a halal product with high integrity, it's been ethically raised and it's had really good conditions. However, they don't seem to understand that the production and the manpower that goes into us giving those halal and tayyib 100% products it needs to be reflected in the price inevitably. But yeah, consumers are increasingly seeking transparency and adhering to those ethical standards. If certifiers are found to be deviating from what they are advertising, the trust and the reputational damage is horrendous. Because we now have access to social media and the internet, all it takes is for one person to post a reel that goes viral, slating that halal certification body and halal standards, and it blows up all over the internet. So this is where we need to be a bit careful with our labeling and the transparency. Like Sister was saying a while ago, you've got some that want all the details, but then they get even more confused. And then you've got others that want all the details and they really, really appreciate this. And people are very fickle with their information and what they understand. We have to remember that all of us here, we are experts. We have PhDs, degrees. We've been studying this a long, long time. Myself, I've been studying this 8-9 years now. A consumer, they just have word of mouth from their parents and then through the community. When looking at frameworks and strategies, obviously Malaysia, New Zealand, and even Australia is starting to catch up now as well, with having these high welfare standards on the farm, but having welfare assurance integrating with that halal label is something that we can definitely work on. And then, of course, we've got that with New Zealand and Australia, you've got your government department. So yes, in the UK, we do have our government departments and we work with DEFRA and AHDB to have the halal standards, and we have our independent halal certifiers that help with this and international trade. But I think just a bit more tighter collaboration could be helpful to have that UK standard, much like New Zealand and Australia work with. And I think this would help on a larger scale to build consumer confidence as well. And having collaboration between scholars and scientists. At the end of the day, like I was saying, there is breaks within our chain. Somebody could be a professor of Islamic studies and Islamic jurisprudence, but how much do they really know about sitting on a farm or being in a slaughterhouse? They can tell you the rulings in Islam. Yes, alhamdulillah, they've studied a long, long time, but being there face to face, facing those day-to-day challenges that we come up against is very, very different. So strategies is mainly collaboration and adhering to research that comes out and then changing our standards and just doing whatever we can to work with each other and educate each other as well.
Totally agree with you on that. Yes. Alhamdulillah, Dr. Awal has joined us. Dr. Awal? Dr. Awal?
Assalamu alaikum, Sister Rosie, and everybody. I hope you're all doing well.
Yes. Alhamdulillah, I'm so happy that you're able to make it. We're still within time, so no worries. I've actually I've already covered two of the questions, two areas of the questions for the panel session with our two sisters. And yeah, I don't think it's time for enough time for you to make your presentation, but there are
Yeah.
some things that Sister Gemma and also I myself, and there's one audience here that is interested in the in what you're doing, Dr. Awal. And what Sister Gemma mentioned earlier relating to you is your travel to New Zealand. If you can
Yeah.
share the experience, because Sister Nadia has shared the Australian experience. Sister Gemma has touched about the UK experience. Maybe you can help to touch a bit about New Zealand
New
experience in
Zealand,
Halal through
yeah.
your observation with your recent visit, and
Yeah.
then tie it with the discussion along with the questions that I have sent to you earlier, if you could.
Yeah. So thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Gemma, good evening. Good evening, Nadia, and everyone here. So I've just come back from, I've just arrived in Brisbane from Wellington. Sister Nadia, I need to get in touch with you whilst I'm in Australia. Yeah, what I've observed, and I really want to hear from Sister Nadia later on. I've observed that that New Zealand is far ahead of the UK in terms of halal. That is the truth. Because if you look at New Zealand, they've got some government involvement in halal. They've also got an industry body called the Meat Industry Association, which is heavily involved in halal. So from that, I think they are doing all they can to assure Muslim community that whatever they are doing is compliance with the halal production. The other thing, I don't know what I hear in Australia, Sister Nadia, is they've got recovery demonstrations because many Muslims do not believe that standing head-only standing is reversible. So they want to demonstrate to the Muslim community that yes, they do stand their animals, but the method of standing they are using is reversible. So Gemma, when I come back, we have a lot to talk about. I think there's a lot we can improve in the UK. Yeah. So thank you.
That's great to hear that there is a successful visit, a successful journey. And you being in Brisbane, Nadia, where are you?
I'm in Sydney,
Sydney,
Australia.
okay.
I
Yeah,
don't know. Which country? Which city?
Yeah, Sydney.
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 Oh,
How
okay.
how far is it from Brisbane?
2 hour flight or an hour and a half flight, I think. I can't
All right,
remember.
all right. Yeah, I need to speak to your dad too. I need
Yeah.
to speak to
Oh,
him.
I
lives
Oh,
in
I have a
Mexico.
quick question for you.
Yeah,
Earlier, I was talking about how we need to engage the youth and the next generations to study halal sciences and get involved in obviously farming and slaughter and those labor-intensive industries to keep our industry going. Um,
yeah,
your book that you wrote about where does my halal meat come from, is that
yeah.
allowed worldwide or is that just UK delivery?
It's allowed worldwide. And I wrote it with a gentleman called Rizvan. Many of you may have known Rizvan. So what we're trying to encourage in the book is regenerative farming, animal welfare, and just telling children how halal meat is produced so that they can understand all the technicalities that are involved. So it's available worldwide, but I'll check again to see where it is available at the minute. Yeah.
Yes. Because it's also a question in the meeting chat about that book.
Yeah.
Sister
Uh-huh.
Gemma mentioned about it because
Yeah.
says something like, I think on a larger scale, having interesting stands and talks like expos for teenager, etc., in a way make halal industry cool. Yeah, I like the word.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we have to start preparing our successor.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So, if I can go back to the questions that I've shared with you, Dr. Awal.
Yeah.
So, from your experience in the UK, is there any government and industry corporation which you can quote or share with us that has helped standardizing the halal certification process?
Unfortunately, there is a lack of interest in halal from the government. The only interest we have seen is what is an organization called the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board. They are doing their best to improve halal, but the government has stated time and time again that they are not interested in halal, which is a pity because Muslims in the UK consume the majority of the meat that we produce when it comes to sheep meat. And mutton, most of the mutton, almost 95% of mutton will end up in the Muslim community. So it is big, but there is lack of investment in the UK. Yeah,
I guess it's because exports is not so great as compared to Australia, the
correct,
dependence on
correct, correct. New
export.
Zealand and Australia, I think they build their systems around export.
Yeah.
But in the UK, we have a big domestic market, and also the EU market is just around the corner. So that's why they haven't paid a lot of attention to halal.
Yeah, and I suppose that the Muslims in these countries they buy their red meats products from the community itself rather than from the off the shelf, right? So
Correct, correct. Most Muslims in the UK will buy from corner shops or
mm,
Muslim operated shops rather
yeah,
than from the main supermarket. But things are changing a little bit, but many people still buy from the corner shops.
yeah. So I
Yeah,
guess for the UK and perhaps even other countries, the fact that the need for halal only meant for their own people's consumption, but also tourists. And I believe
correct.
is in tourism.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure whether he or she. I hope that during the Q&A session in a while, you can come forward and ask some questions. Yeah. Um,
Mm.
so the next question to Dr. Awal is that how can HCB collaborate across borders to minimize the impact of varying international halal standards?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge we have with HCBs in Europe and also worldwide is lack of training. We need to standardize auditing protocol. We need to standardize training because if you take two auditors to an abattoir, for instance, to audit, one auditor may finish auditing within 2 hours, another can stay there for 4 hours. Also, if you look at how much is charged, the charging is different. We need to standardize this thing before we can collaborate with the industry. I'm just talking about Europe for now. Australia and New Zealand may be different. So we need to standardize our procedures, our auditing protocols, our standards before we start talking to industry.
You're right.
Yeah.
So I guess the learning process, I mean, the sharing of the experience is very important. Like I was telling Sister Nadia just now, she has traced back the halal certification in Australia way back to the 1600s. My tracing is only in 1964.
Yeah.
Whatever information that Jakim can provide, and she does her own study, and that's very commendable. So I guess every one of us should start looking, tracing histories and sharing them because it will help one another to make the halal integrity stronger, the
Yeah.
halal traceability better, and the HCB is more confident in certifying and at the end of it benefit the Ummah. So
Yeah.
last round, going to Sister Gemma, how can we ensure future workforce development aligns with evolving ethical consideration in areas like animal welfare within the halal industry? What's one trend in the workforce training that can revisionize halal integrity? You're mute. Sister Gemma, unmute.
Of course I am. There we are. So as I said before, workforce training could potentially integrate ethical animal welfare principles in certification and veterinary education, which we do well, especially at the point of slaughter and while the animals are being handled around this area. In veterinary education and animal sciences, there are ethics units where students will actually study this quite in depth and write essays about it. I think cross-disciplinary collaboration between science experts and religious scholars and industry leaders could ensure the training involves those ethical advancements as well. Um, and like continuous professional development programs. So I'm not sure about the rest of the world, but here in the UK, once you're in a job, we are offered what's called CPD. So even when I'm lecturing, I will be given days off to go out into industry and pick up some more knowledge to then bring back into my lectures. I think this would be helpful within the halal industry everywhere, where maybe there could be some sort of initiative put forward where people are released from their day jobs to then go and work in a different area or sector of the halal industry to have professional development so we fully understand where we are. I think it's very easy for us to get stuck in our certain section of the supply chain. Especially if you've got one of the more labor intensive parts of the supply chain. So I think that would be a good initiative as well. And that could help revolutionize the halal integrity along our global welfare and religious standards as well, because it could even be something like a scholar has a day release to actually go to a farm, or a day release to go to a packaging or labeling institute, or come and sit with Awal in one of his meetings. Sometimes they don't understand fully what each other do on a day-to-day basis. So I think that could help with halal integrity. And the adoption of that technology-driven training. So we may have AI with the sensors and checking the algorithms for halal quality. But maybe if we are restricted with travel or hands-on training, we have virtual reality, we have VR. I used it at work a few weeks ago where I got the students to put the VR headsets on and they were transported to a factory farm and they got to walk around. It was very funny watching them all stand there wobbling around and they're not actually doing anything in particular. But it was really, really helpful, and it was insightful to see what different viewpoints they all got from that virtual reality. So that could help transform the halal workforce education. We could load up programs where you could go VR to Australia or VR to Malaysia, and we can actually see it face to face. We could also do more hands-on for that humane handling. Of course, we have restrictions in slaughterhouses of health and safety and biosecurity. Of course, we do. But having immersive environments to allow us to have more real world application as well could revolutionize halal, maybe using this kind of technology.
Yeah, that's I like the VR's part to sort of like substitute for an actual presence, because like in Malaysia, students from the universities are now requested to do internship for about minimum 6 months, and some of these graduates that I got to know, they in from one university that they are what do you call that? They're encouraged to mix their internship 6 months in industry and then 4 months or so in in Jakim, or even the state's certification agency. So they get exposed to both sides of the coin, and that's, I think, is a good experience for them. And this is something that worth sharing and see how we can exchange. But the VR is also a good idea, very, very good idea indeed. Right. So I go to Sister Nadia first. What do you envision as a key trend in halal certification in Australia, and how can this be leveraged to enhance workforce development and adapt these emerging trends? You're on mute too, Nadia.
I've done it too.
Yes.
I was going to say to you, as I was saying before, like we've got a massive cosmetic boom here in Australia. And you know, you do have trends, and although like it's not as if it's new, women are wanting to wear hair makeup, and they want it to be halal, and even if it's just for their weddings or at night time. And being in obviously there's two issues with this that we're going to get into is when we start to get newer markets here in Australia. I remember the pharmaceutical, when it first started, you'd try and get ingredients and then none of it was halal, even though you've got so many flavor houses certified here in Australia as halal. It's just where they're buying their products, they're just not halal. So as the area starts to build, it hopefully, like in a couple of years, there will be more of their suppliers getting halal certified. But this is the start of it, where it just, even though cosmetics was definitely a boom way down in the 90s, it's come in a totally different way, in a huge, huge way here, and it's beyond like trying to get that certified at this present time. One of the issues that we do have, and I know Sister Gemma's brought this up, is being in a Muslim minority country and just taking cosmetics into consideration. We will require chemists and flavorists and whatever to deal with that. But what we have a problem here in Australia, and it's a trend and it's situation that's a real challenge here, is we don't have as many skilled. I mean, we've got many Muslims that are skilled, not necessarily that we are staying in the halal certification industry. Sharia people predominantly want to be teachers. They don't want to be auditors. So, and scientists want to be QAs, or they want to be working in research, or they want to be in labs. So we have this real starvation of Muslims that are right. So it would be phenomenal if we had universities and schools offering this. I know us as a certification body, we try to teach the youth so they will be the next generation for us to learn halal, or else we're going to just pass away and it just be left with who, I don't know. So these are our trends and these are our challenges that we have around how we're going to leverage on that workforce at this present time.
Yeah.
To be continued, I'd say.
Yes, indeed. Dr. Awal, if I can give your time to Sister Gemma a bit, because her baby is crying. So, Sister Gemma, you can just wrap up. Let's just give you some time to just wrap up and give an overall, what's there in the future.
I think the immediate future is, like Dr. Awal was saying, is just to work domestically or maybe within that, like our areas. So obviously you've got CIMIC and then you've got the Malaysian standards. I think if we can work together to have those harmonized standards and try and work together and work with our issues that we have domestically, and then maybe alongside that, just do a little bit more, start raising more awareness, especially to the younger generations, of what the halal industry is, what we all do, maybe give them some case studies of different, we could even get actual people's case studies. So we could have people such as yourself, where we have a little bit of background about you, because they're not aware of what goes on at all. I think some social media drives would be a good idea as well. And then maybe in the future, once we're all a bit more on the same page, we can start integrating some of those training systems as well, and having that harmonized halal standards, I think. And then hopefully, yeah, we can do things at expos where we're trying to get the younger generations walking through the doors of these conferences and these expos. Maybe we could open up the floor and these speaking opportunities to students rather than just industry professionals, because they're the ones doing the new research. They're the new PhD students. They're going to be the new us. I don't want to make you all feel really old, but they will be the new us. So yeah, actually give them the limelight and let them drive what happens next, and maybe tell us what the youth wants, tell us what the industry is telling them. They're in different circles to us. So I think that would be a good thing for the future, the near future.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think all this while, if I see, I mean, as we see the trends of webinars and conferences, it's all the experience talking to the participants, to the audience, but and when asking for Q&A, people are afraid and you don't have any questions. I think we need to encourage for these people to then start talking about their viewpoints. And yeah, I hope that the next International Halal Conference will focus one session on that. Yeah, Brother Muhammad, I hope you're listening to that. Right. So thank you very much, Sister Gemma, for your contribution. I think it's very insightful, and all the best. And I hope we can continue our collaborations in terms of exchanging ideas and knowledge in the near future. Assalamualaikum to you.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you everybody for attending.
All right. Okay, back to you, Dr. Awal. I put you last because I would like you to wrap up also in terms of your in this short while that you joined us, from your experience in traveling, from your observation in the UK. How can you ensure that the future workforce development, based on your observation, that the can support the development of skilled professionals in the halal industry, both in the UK and also globally?
Yeah, I have Sister Nadia. What we need to do is use modernization to bring abattoirs close to consumers and also the younger generation. I was in Dubai a few weeks ago, and I went to Dubai municipality's abattoir. I was invited by a very good brother Nasser, and he opened the door for me. If you go in there, you see a glass where consumers can actually see their animals being processed. In the UK, it's very difficult to get to an abattoir. We need to move away from that. So either we have virtual reality to bring it closer to consumers, or we allow consumers access to abattoirs. In the UK, we had an issue just last month where an NGO put secret cameras in a halal abattoir, and the Muslim slaughtermen were actually abusing animals. They were abusing animals not even at the point of slaughter, but when they were restraining them, they were throwing them about. So I said that has got nothing to do with halal. That is more to do with human behavior. So you need to train people to understand proper handling of animals, so that slaughtermen can understand all the significance of these things. Then we need to bring it closer to the consumer, either via virtual reality or what we saw in Dubai, where they've got a glass, people can come in and actually pick their meat. And it was a very clean abattoir. So we can use that as an example to attract people to abattoirs. It's not a killing, well, we do kill animals there, but it's not a murderous environment. It's actually a very clean, and the process can be attractive to others.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And Alhamdulillah, I'm very happy that this particular what do you call that conference, we managed to bring in good insights from the speakers, sharing of ideas. I mean, just day two, and I feel that I learned a lot more now. I mean, there's so many things I still have to learn. So there's a question. I mean, let's go to the audience. Can you ask the question yourself, please? I'm not quite sure. Is a brother or a sister? Fairuz?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm a sister from Cape Town, South Africa. I want to say shukran to all the participants and to yourself as a moderator for this wonderful topics that have been brought up here today. My question is just about, well, the last question I posed is, when you speak about the workers in these abattoirs, are they, I mean, they work with these animals all the time, having to restrain them and that type of thing. Are there any programs or wellness programs in place for these workers, so that they too are taken care of, and, anger management, all of those kind of things? Is there something like that in place in those places?
Brother Dr. Awal?
That's a very good point, Sister Feroz. Unfortunately, in the UK, we don't have wellness courses or wellness interactions with slaughtermen, but we do need it, because I've just given you an example where people were abusing animals. If we had something like that, maybe it would be different. The only course slaughtermen will do before slaughter is what we call certificate of competence. So they take them through a practical knife sharpening and also slaughter process before they start processing. But I agree with you, maybe we need a wellness thing so that we can make them feel empathy for animals they are slaughtering.
Sister Nadia, your views on that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Here in Australia, we have the RSPCA, which also comes to audit the abattoir. So they are predominantly on animal welfare. One of the requirements is there must be cameras in the slaughterhouse, the pens, I think in the stunning area. So, and they will look back on this. So they will gain a fine if they see any animal cruelty. Also, one of the requirements here in Australia is anyone touching an animal has to undergo animal welfare training, and they must have a certificate with regards to that. And it's part of their, being audited against as well. So we're pretty lucky in that regard.
I would say that Sister Farou's question just now is a bit unique because she's not talking about the welfare of the animal. She's talking about the welfare of the slaughterman because
Oh, that's
they look at blood every day. Most of the time, it can be anger management that needs to be addressed also, right?
That's true. And like Brother Awal said that the slaughtermen also go through, we've got a national slaughtering program that can be done through TAFE as well. And it will go through making sure that, anger management or, being in control of your emotions and, not being angry and holding a knife is basically. So, yeah, it definitely, and it's a great question. It really is a great question.
Yeah.
Rosie, if I can just say something, when we apply for jobs, we have to produce our CVs and resumes and those type of things. And, you obviously have to fit the picture. But that's only the beginning. But, are those programs for, like you said, anger management and those type of things, is it an ongoing thing? Is it something like, because wellness is being introduced in so many corporate companies, that don't even have that stresses of having to move around animals all the time and manage them and having to be in that blood situation as we know it. Some people don't have maybe any other skills or certification to be in another job, but this is the one that they would take up, as an alternative maybe, or maybe a mainstream business for themselves. But I think the wellness should be part of an ongoing process, not just as, initial stage of getting a job opportunity.
Very true.
Great. Okay. Anybody else that would like to I think the Awal, you accidentally pressed something, right?
Sorry.
I
Sorry,
think
let me stop.
you were
Yeah,
sharing something.
sorry.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else that would like to pose questions here? Feel free, Okay, there's a question on the chat here that I would like Dr. Awal and Sister Nadia to just give your views based on your experience here about, she's concerned what Sister Gemma talked about the next generation, so so it is also like part of a risk for the future. Now, how can we solve it? Yes, we know that stunning, the machine using machine bolts and all that has been banned because they're not good. But is there any way that for the future, with the advancement of technology, that somehow or rather there could be a possibility that such machine replacement can be done to help ease up this or fill up the gap that could be coming without us having to without it being what do you call that affecting the religious obligation. So Nadia first.
Yeah, I was going to say anything is possible. And I'd say with the technology that's happening at the present time, I mean, I remember when I started doing like using a computer in the 1990s or something, thinking, oh, I'll never take off. I'm not going to learn. And then look at us now.
Yes.
So I do think it's going to be the younger generation and those ones inside those engineering and scientific roles that are going to develop something, and it's going to revolutionize. It's just whether the certifiers and the abattoirs and the governments are going to take it on, because making a big change and having to take on, does it affect the religious aspect? Does it of what we know and what we're all aware of in the industry is going to be probably where the challenge lies. I think anything can be automated. I mean, it probably can get to a stage where AI is going to start doing our auditing. I don't know. I'm not saying that, but you know, we are entering into that AI revolutionary era.
Yeah, I'm actually I started to use AI in drafting my presentation, but yeah, you use to be careful because I do have the background, so I know some of the AI's recommendation are out of
Yeah.
out of line. But we have to be careful that the AI also needs to be monitored, that
Mm.
people know when it's out of line. Like me, I know when it's out of line, and I know when yeah, they're giving. It's a good brainstorming platform for me, right? Dr. Awal, what's your take on that?
E-
You muted yourself.
Yeah, from what I've, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, from what I've seen in New Zealand, I think they are well advanced in terms of researching into new systems to help the industry. And I've just arrived in Australia. I also have a look. On Thursday, I'm visiting an abattoir with a researcher. You may know her, Nadia. She's called Alison Small. She developed a system where you put an electrode on the head of a cow and increase the temperature of the head so that the brain temperature will increase to a stage where the animal will become insensible to pain. So I'm going to look at it on Thursday in Melbourne. So I
Oh,
think there's
I've
a
been there.
lot.
I know where you're
Oh,
going.
oh, you've been there, yeah?
Yeah, that's
Okay,
amazing.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, all right. So yeah, I'll be going to see how it works. So I think a lot of people are working, but what we need to do as Muslims is we need to start funding research. Muslims are only interested in making money. When we make money, what do we use it for? We need to reinvest it into halal. And the best way to do that is to fund research so that new developments can be made.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I think people are not that aware or appreciate the fact that this meat-based industry is still very important, that it affects the other industry, especially pharmaceuticals,
Yeah.
that requires a lot of materials that is coming from animal, indirectly, right? But and we still haven't solved the problem about gelatin. Yeah, I've been in halal for 20 years and it's still not solved yet. It's still 5% halal certified gelatin since then until now. It's still the number has not increased. So yeah, there's still a long way to go. And one thing is that the sharing and also this having the knowledge, sharing of history and sharing of knowledge, focusing on this is very important for us to prepare our next generation. So as a wrap up, there's no other questions from the floor, right? It's good that I hope that I haven't taken up too much time, and I hope you do enjoy this extra time that we've taken up for this discussion. As a wrap up, one rapid question to the two remaining speakers. One actionable step that you would prioritize to strengthen the halal ecosystem, and then you can also give your last view of this particular session that you are participating in. Nadia, first.
Yep. Sorry, I didn't know if you wanted me first. Definitely say investment in technology-driven verification methods and education with the Muslim consumers, as well as harmonized standards, most definitely. And
Yeah,
it's
harmonizing
been a
standards.
great session. It was really good to see the different continents discussing kind of almost the same issues. So it was really good.
Yeah. Yeah, harmonization. I think coming from a pharmaceutical industry that they themselves is having issues of harmonizing their pharmaceutical requirements. If you look at pharmaceutical industry and halal industry, in terms of requirements of certification or approval, is almost the same. And if you want to export or import, if you want to export to a country your pharmaceutical product, almost similar things that is required for halal certified products is being asked for pharmaceuticals. But I don't think the same goes for food, and that's why the request for harmonization is very prominent at the but that should not stem the request or the movement to harmonize them. It's a good point, and it's something that we need to strive with wisdom. So, Dr. Awal, please unmute.
Okay, I think another area we need to improve is collaboration. Once we achieve what Sister Nadia is saying in terms of funding innovations, we need to collaborate to share ideas to be able to see areas we can improve going forward. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, that's a good point, and I believe let's use this International Halal Conference since it's a webinar that we can continue to exchange ideas. Like I said earlier, under the patronage and support of SMIC, I think we can get more mileage from this discussion, inshallah. So with that, I really thank you, Sister Nadia, Sister Gemma, for sharing your work, your history, and Sister Nadia, you really make me want to relook at what I want to do for my DBA. Going back to more beyond 1960s. And Dr. Awal, and I wish that I could travel so that I can share like what you experience in by observing. But I hope that what Sister Gemma said about virtual reality, I can experience that too. So thank you very much, everybody, and also thank you very much to the participants. Even though you are quiet, except for Sister Fairuz, but I believe that this particular session is beneficial to you, inshallah, and I really hope that I've carried my task well in moderating the session and hosting this particular day too. So with that, I thank you very much. Let's end this with praising Allah subhanallah and give his salawat to our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and remind ourselves with Surah Wal-Asr. Rahim. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. So with that, I close this session. Thank you very much. Please do join the following days, day 3 onwards, where unfortunately for me, but fortunately I hope for you all too, that I'm continuing to be moderator for day 3 and 4, and I'll be in day 6 presentation and panel session. So hopefully you'll join not only those sessions that I've quoted, but also all the other sessions that you can see from the program book and posters, and participate actively. All right. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum. For those who are going to have iftar, have a good iftar. Who are continuing to fast, persevere. All right. Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.